Chapter 7 covers the critical reasoning concepts in the Wiley-Cat VRC book. It covers not just critical reasoning concepts but everything about logic. But it skips out certain things which assume that you have some knowledge of, which is taught in every coaching center otherwise, only to keep the size of the book within limits so that more focus can be given on RC than uh, logic alone as a big subject. So therefore, before reading this chapter or viewing this video, you must go to my YouTube channel and see my videos on syllogisms and propositional logic. So let's start with critical reasoning concepts as discussed in my book. As you are aware, logic is a subject in its own right. It is taught as a separate subject in good universities like Delhi University, and many students who are doing BCom honors or Eco honors take logic as an additional, let's say, subsidiary. Lawyers all have logic in any case, right? So logic is a subject of its in its own right. And what is this subject about? It gives you the tools and techniques and concepts whereby you can distinguish between correct reasoning and incorrect reasoning. So the whole aim is that we should not get carried away and through irrational and illogical reasoning and through fallacies we form our own opinions and corrupt our minds. We should be ruthlessly logical, incisively logical in our thinking. So, a study of logic sharpens your mind, sharpens your ability to define terms clearly, see the relationship between those terms, and in a way, it improves your overall reading comprehension skills. More so when the author is presenting clear arguments or is counteracting other arguments, picking holes in somebody else's arguments, and so and so. If you have a logical mind, you will love that kind of RC passage. So let's start by seeing that types of reasoning. There are two types. Deductive is something you're aware of because this you do in mathematics. Whatever you're doing is deductive reasoning. And in LR, whatever you do is deductive reasoning. Here, you see, the answer is definitely true. So let's see what are the features of deductive reasoning. Let me read it out for you. Deductive reasoning starts with general truths. So it doesn't start in vacuum. You have to have some general truths to start with before you can proceed, such as all humans are mortal, all men are rational. Now, how have we arrived at these general truths? Uh, human knowledge, where does it start? So human knowledge starts by observation. So we observed this man, he's rational, another man, he's rational. Then we checked the third guy, and like that we kept checking. We found that all men are probably rational. So let's say if you've checked 1,000, you've checked a lakh, you've checked a million, your degree of probability that they're rational increases. So that part is known as enumerative induction. So that is inductive reasoning, in fact, which we'll come to a little later. But understand that mankind, humans, when they came on earth, they started thinking through inductive reasoning. Even Einstein, when he sat down before an apple tree or whatever, as the legend goes, he used inductive reasoning. He found that everything that goes up comes down. See, here is that apple falling on my head on its own. Why isn't it going up or just staying there? So it is through observations that we start. And then we observe things. A child, when he starts his life, he starts observing things. He says, Mama loves me. Right? He reaches that general truth. How? How does he reach that general truth? Okay. Papa is always late from office. How does he reach that general truth? because he has observed it so often. That is called enumerative induction. When you look at a thing again and again and again, a thing repeating itself, you say, damn it, this must be probably true. So you assign a degree of probability which could be close to 100 because you've seen it so many times, right? So let's now, after through inductive reasoning, you've reached general truths, right? And then from there, then you start deducing further, right? I, as a teacher, have taught for, let's say, 18 years, and I have observed and observed and observed many students. So I reached the conclusion that all students are probably intelligent, right? And after that, I say, so Ram is a student, therefore he's intelligent. So all students are intelligent. I take it for granted as a truth. Where does it come from? From my inductive reasoning. Okay. So deductive reasoning starts with general truths. It then proceeds from these general truths to discover other general truths or apply them to specific cases as shown in two deductive arguments below. So let's see the from general to specific first. Now here always a statement, the first two are the premise. Premise is the uh, what is presented, what is put forth in an argument as factual information, right? Conclusion is what is logically claimed to follow from there. So the first premise is all humans are mortal. Second premise is Socrates is human. Conclusion is Socrates must be mortal or is mortal, must be true. So premise, we are in deductive reasoning, we are not saying whether this is true or not, we are saying if all humans are mortal is true, and if Socrates is human is true, we are not getting into the truth or falsity of it. Even if you have arrived at it through inductive reasoning or whichever way you have arrived at, right? For us, everything remains, we're just seeing the mechanics of logic, mechanics of reduction. So if premise 1 and premise 2 are true, therefore Socrates is mortal must be true. So from a general premise, all humans are mortal, then we knew about a specific case that Socrates is human. So therefore we concluded about Socrates that he is mortal also, right? Now from a general to a general. So if all men are rational is true, let's say we've observed it and therefore reached here, but in deductive reasoning you're not worried whether it's true, right? And no animals are rational is true, therefore no men are animals, must be true. Okay, or no animals are men or no men are animals. So again, a general statement, a universal statement, a universal affirmative statement, all men are rational. Suppose it was like all men are rational, all rational are gods, therefore all men are gods. So you could have had a all situation as well. But I have tried to give one which is, let's say, very easy to understand. All men are rational, universal affirmative. No animals are rational, universal negative. Therefore, no men are animals. Again, a universal negative statement. So it's a universal statement. That means it's a general truth. So even a no is a general truth, a all is a general truth because you're covering all members of the set of men and animals. So this is deductive reasoning, no big deal. This is something you're fully aware of and doesn't sound. And if you've watched my videos on syllogism and propositional logic, this is just a repetition. So let's define a deductive argument. A deductive argument is defined as one whose conclusion is claimed to follow from its premise with absolute necessity. This necessity not being a matter of degree. So it's not like 90% it is true. There is no degree to it. It is almost true. No, it is absolute true. It is proceeding out of logical necessity. that if all humans are mortal, Socrates is human, Socrates is mortal must be true out of logical necessity. Right? This means that the premise provide conclusive grounds for the conclusion, and the conclusion is drawn from the premise out of logical necessity must be true. Now, such an argument can be either valid or invalid. We have seen two cases of valid syllogisms on top, right? So, valid is when the premises provide conclusive grounds for the conclusion. Invalid is when the premises do not provide conclusive grounds for the conclusion. So, let's take the first one. All humans are mortal. Socrates is mortal, therefore he is human. That would be invalid because that's not true in all circumstances. That doesn't emerge out of logical necessity, right? So remember, deductive reasoning, logical necessity, premise provide conclusive grounds for the conclusion. A deductive argument is either valid or invalid. Just keep that as bullet points in your head. So now what is inductive reasoning? Inductive reasoning is a form of reasoning that is most useful for decision making in real life. And in real life, we don't come across definite situations. Like nobody says all men are mortal, right? In real life, we have to think in terms of probability, make assessments in probabilistic terms. So, all situations. So, when you do MBA, you will have thick books on managerial decision making, and it will be all about probability. There you will learn a lot of statistics. Okay, the normal distribution curve, the Poisson curve, etc., etc. I've done it long back, so my memory is a little fuzzy. But in real life, you don't have anything definitely to go by. Let's say a coaching center, right, launches a ad campaign, and after that they observe that there's 25% increase in, let's say, their enrollments. Now from there, can they conclude that the advertisement campaign has been successful? So can they say advertisement campaign was the cause of the increase in enrollments? Are you sure? Can you say it definitely? Can you say that it must be true out of logical necessity? There could not be any other reasons that their enrollment has increased. It has to be this because this they implemented. So that is inductive reasoning where you got to evaluate probability. Now later if they learn, let's say they make a decision that yes, our campaign has been successful. And then they, ask students around and they find students saying, sir, CL बहुत बेकार है, so वहाँ counselor भी ठीक से बात नहीं करती. So kids who've been put off because of CL's internal troubles, their, let's say, partners are having a fight, so the employees are disgruntled, so counselors are not treating students properly, so students are leaving CL and joining and going here, there in search of some other institute and coming to yours also. Once you realize that, then you say, oh, our ad campaign may not have been so successful after all. This could have been one of the reasons. Partly, this could have been one reason. Ad campaign could have had some effect to get these guys this side. So maybe it's a contributory thing. So you don't know. In inductive reasoning, you can never know that the decision you've taken with whatever probability is actually true. Because if you get more information, you may realize that, oh, we reached this conclusion in a hurry or with the data available then, but now we've got additional data. So in real life, this is what you do. In real life, in real management situations, when you're working as a manager in a company, this is what's going to happen. Inductive reasoning. But the trouble is, I find kids are not even aware of the word inductive reasoning. They may have studied mathematical induction, you see, but inductive reasoning word they've never heard in their lives. So let me break the myth around this inductive reasoning to say it's everyday affair. All the logic you apply is every day. You're constantly making evaluations and assigning probabilities, right? वो यार आएगा कि लेट आएगा, यार वो हमेशा लेट आता है, आज भी लेट ही आएगा तो मैं थोड़ा लेट ही जाता हूँ, ठीक है? That's inductive reasoning. You have observed many times he's come late, so आज भी लेट आएगा, 90% chance है. So that is, you have reached a conclusion based on probability. So let me now read. Inductive reasoning is a form of reasoning that is most useful for decision making in real life probabilistic situations in your personal and professional lives. In sharp contrast to a deductive argument, an inductive argument is one whose conclusion is claimed to follow from its premise only with probability, not logical necessity. So it's not Markasam, by God, definite. It is probably true, right? This probability being a matter of degree, depending on how sure you are, how many observations you have taken into account, right? How many factors you have included, how wide a survey and information you've gathered. Okay, so in other words, the premises provide some support. That sum is an indefinite. That sum could be some. It could be some. That means you could have little support below 50%, high support above 50% probability. So in other words, the premise provides some support but not conclusive support for the conclusion. And the conclusion is drawn from the premises with some degree of probability, not logical necessity. That's being repeated, because in your head only that is logical which is pakka logical, not vaguely logical, right? Now probability, probably true, you'll say yaar probably true to may ho gaya na, may be true, may not be true, to kya bol raha hai, kya logic lagaya tune? Are you're saying probably true with a high degree of probability, right? Now let us see. Such an argument is either strong or weak, depending on the degree or extent of support the premise provide the conclusion. So, कुछ सपोर्ट दे रहा है तो वीक है, फिर कुछ और दे रहा है थोड़ा स्ट्रॉन्गर हो रहा है, फिर और कुछ इंफॉर्मेशन आए और स्ट्रॉन्ग हो गया. सो ऐसे आर्गुमेंट स्ट्रॉन्ग होती जाती है as you gather more information. So let's take a simple example. Newspapers, there are more newspapers sold in Noida than in Ghaziabad. So I reach a conclusion that residents of Noida are no more knowledgeable about world affairs than residents of Ghaziabad. Now that's a weak argument. Are uska knowledgeable about world affairs. How have you reached that conclusion just based on more, just because more newspapers are sold? You have you considered other factors? पॉपुलेशन चेक किया है, ज्यादा अखबारें बिक रही हैं तो पॉपुलेशन भी तो ज्यादा हो सकती है. सो फाइनली यू सी न्यूज़पेपर भी ज्यादा बिक रहे, इट शुड बी न्यूज़पेपर्स पर 10 people or something, that factor. So check population. So then you check population. Population of Noida is less than population of Ghaziabad. So this strengthens your existing argument, but it still remains weak. You still cannot say with great probability that people will be more knowledgeable in Noida than Ghaziabad. Then you look for more information. Then you find that Noida newspaper edition is high coverage of world affairs than Ghaziabad newspaper. That further strengthens. So more newspapers, less population, more coverage. So Noida वालों की तो चांदी है. They would certainly have more knowledge about world affairs as compared to Ghaziabad guys. Then you come across the information that most people come from Ghaziabad and buy their newspapers in Noida before they go to work, right? So then you say, oh, what I was convinced about. Now the newspapers being sold in Noida, most of them are going to Ghaziabad guys. So then my conclusion, my argument again becomes weak. So it's a matter of information. The more the premise, the more the information you have, more factors you have concluded, right? Surveyed and come to, the more stronger your inductive argument. Otherwise, it's a weak argument. So here there is no question of valid or invalid. So even if you've gathered a lot and you finally reach a very strong argument in inductive reasoning, it will some further additional information could totally destroy it and make it again a weak argument, right? So that is the nature of inductive reasoning, which we need to do. It's a necessity for us to do, because deductive reasoning, for that I need some general truths. You can't sit in a company and say, sir, I want some general truths, then I will do logical deductive reasoning and tell you the answer. Don't tell me to think in in terms of probability. That's nonsense. Either R or par. That's all. I'm an engineer. I'm the most logical guy on earth, right? I only think in those terms. If you do, you're severely limited. You're incapable of functioning in this world. So anybody thinks LR में मैं अच्छा हूँ तो मेरी logic अच्छी है. If you are weak in VARC, which includes RC, because RC is all about inductive reasoning. If you can't answer questions about primary purpose, right? You have gone through my other videos on inductive reasoning or through my book, right? So, evaluative level of reasoning is all inductive reasoning. What is the tone of the author here? So, students say, why this? How can I choose this? What is the basis? अरे प्रोबेबिलिटी, अनुमान लगाओ, ये शब्द यूज किए उसने, ये शब्द से क्या भावना वो प्रकट कर रहा है, समझने की कोशिश करो. He is probably being sarcastic here, isn't he? Right? Probably his primary purpose is this and not the other options. Probably these are his three key arguments. So if you don't know inductive reasoning, you are incapable of functioning on this world. Okay, so just get that straight in your head, especially engineers. Because I find this as a serious failure of our education system, where this thing is, what a silly thing, but okay. So now let's see deductive reasoning, premises, complete, conclusive grounds for the conclusion, logical necessity, valid or invalid. That is deductive reasoning. Inductive reasoning, premises, some grounds for conclusion, probably true, not must be true, right? Hence, strong argument or weak argument. So, there are three areas of inductive reasoning. Clearly, first one is the most common. If I observe one crow, I am an ornithologist, then I observe another crow is black, then I observe crows all over the world. I go to Antarctica, I go here, there, I find all crows are black. So, from so many observations, I reach a conclusion that probably all crows are black. That's how I got this general truth. But inductive reasoning still says probably. You can say that if that is true, then this kawa who is doing can must also be black. Let's open the window and see. Okay. So this is known as enumerative induction. Then if you establish analogical relationships, that is also reasoning. You see, that's why you must do a lot of analogies to make your mind. Comparing things, establishing similarities, that's a very rational function of your mind. So you draw analogies between two things. And if you see, we did a passage on dogmatic thinking and critical thinking, and there was an analogy about, the relationship between of critical thinking with dogmatic thinking. And the answer was chiseling on a marble block. That means critical reasoning takes the marble block from the dogmatic thinking as raw material and then superimposes and refines it into scientific knowledge. So, by drawing that analogy, the whole idea became far clearer. So, greater clarity is achieved through such reasoning. So, drawing, establishing analogical relationship is a normal human function. An argument by analogy can be such a strong argument at times. In my own working professional career in the Indian Navy, I have won many arguments with the Comptroller and Auditor General, staff by drawing analogies, and so they closed all those objections on the Navy. You see, so they found yes, this guy is true, this guy is right. क्या logic पेश किया है? So argument by analogy by itself is such a strong argument that all comes under inductive reasoning. Establishing causes of observed phenomena. Now, all sciences, all fields of study, you have to establish cause and effect relationships. Even in real life, like वो लेट क्यों आया अभी तक आया नहीं, सो योर ट्राइंग कॉज क्या हो सकता है, वाइफ ने मुझे रिंग नहीं किया, शी सेड 10 बजे करेगी, राइट? सो यू आर ट्राइंग टू establish, figure out possibilities. Oh, phone na dead ho gaya ho, or this. So similarly in all scientific phenomena, so real life as well as science, all science first observes, establishes, then hypothesis that this is probably the cause. So cause and effect relationship is the essence of science. Whether it's sociology, anthropology, when man invented fire, fire was the cause of what all developments in early human society, right? What were the causes in economics? What were the causes of the Great Depression? So constantly you're looking for causes and you're trying to relate them with effects. Let's take another simple case. A police commissioner, let's say of Delhi, he starts some special kind of program to stop eve teasing and other crimes against women, right, to bring it under control. And he finds that in a year the proportion has come down. So he'll say, see, my measures have been effective, they have been the cause. So constantly you are thinking of cause and effect relationships. All that is inductive reasoning. In deductive reasoning, what do? All humans are mortal. Socrates is human, therefore he is mortal. Right? If the doorbell rings, the dog barks. Or if the police program is effective, crime will come down. So the only thing is the same thing you do here, there you do it with greater definiteness. Here you do it with probability. Because you don't know. In real life, there could be other factors also. एक पूरा जो गैंग ऑपरेट कर रहा था दिल्ली में, वो अभी क्योंकि पुलिस की सख्ती हो गई है दिल्ली में, they may have shifted to Noida and Ghaziabad. Check, their crime rates have already gone up. So have you been really effective? You've been effective as far as Delhi is concerned, but you've created a problem for somebody else. So these things is inductive reasoning has these three areas, and cause and effect in any case is part of all kinds of reasoning and all sciences. Okay, so I hope inductive reasoning is clear, because some students were saying that this it doesn't sink into my head. And that critical reasoning and general critical reasoning are largely inductive reasoning. LR is deductive reasoning fully, but critical reasoning, RC, everything you do otherwise is inductive reasoning. Okay, now let's try to move a little faster. Let us see the types of critical reasoning questions. So the most common is drawing an inference, which is also the most common in reading comprehension. So reading comprehension inference is the same thing as critical reasoning inference. So what is an inference? An inference is what is not explicitly stated, but what logically follows from what is stated. So in a passage, if something is given, Reading in between the line is the inference. If a finance minister says the economic growth is slow, he means the present uh, uh, needs to be improved. You can infer that he feels the GDP growth needs to be improved. If it is slow, it needs to be improved. That is so logical, that can be a straight inference. So, in writing, in paras, in critical reasoning arguments, otherwise, authors can make their points in indirect ways, suggesting ideas without actually stating them. These questions measure your ability to infer an author's intended meaning in certain parts of the passage where the meaning is only suggested, right? And your ability to differentiate what is inferred and what is explicitly stated. So this should be clear. I'll give you another simple example of inference. At the border, a BSF Jawan observes that some stray cattle are grazing on the Pakistan side of the barbed wire, let's say, of the fence, right? So he can infer that that area doesn't seem to be mined. Mines have not been laid there, because had they laid there, one of these cattle would have, flown up in the air. A mine would have exploded and killed some of the cattle. So that's an inference. All crime, Sushant Singh Rajput crime, everybody is inferring. Media is inferring. You as a observer are constantly inferring कि ये हुआ है तो कुछ जरूर होगा पीछे. So all suspicions, all misgivings, all those are inferences. Sherlock Holmes did all his solving of murder cases through inference. So let us see how in critical reasoning question inference works. So you'll be normally critical reasoning has simple arguments. Maximum there'll be two premise and sometimes a conclusion or sometimes nothing. Okay. So let's say there is one premise, all S is M. Second premise, all M is P. So all S is M, all M is P. Therefore, you can conclude that all S is P. So if you can conclude all S is P, that's also an inference. An inference, a conclusion is also an inference. What logically follows from what is given is also an inference. And if you have, it can also be called a properly drawn conclusion, but it is also an inference. So inference is like another word for conclusion. But if you say all S is M, and from there some S is M is your, yes, if all S is M, some S is M is also a conclusion. So that's inferable from it, right? जब सारे ही एस एम हैं, जब सारे स्टूडेंट्स इंटेलिजेंट हैं, कुछ तो होंगे ही ना. So therefore, inference can be anything from any word, any phrase in the sentence. It need not be the final conclusion of the two premise, right? That's why I've stated. An inference can be considered an unstated conclusion, but drawn not as a result of both, not all S is M wala thing, but drawn from any one or both of the given premises. And therefore, I've said, now most of the time I find that people have a wrong RC habit. So when they do reading comprehension, they have a habit, अच्छा, option, try to match. Passage में कहाँ दिया है, क्या कहा था. So they try to match. Now that same habit will not work in any question in critical reasoning, because it is not what is given in the passage. It is an inference is what is not given in the passage, what is not explicitly stated. So don't look for a direct answer in the passage. All questions of critical reasoning, don't look for the direct answer in the questions. Even in RC, don't look for the direct answer in the question, except a few which may be specific detailed questions at the literal level of meaning. So matching RC theory with critical reasoning theory, you must understand that the specific detail part, the literal level of meaning, in CAT you can have questions. In ZAT, rarely you'll have a literal level of meaning question. In IFT, you'll have more at that level because they're the easier, where you can go back to the passage and see, yes, this is stated. So based on what is actually stated, you can answer a few questions in RC. But majority of RC is also at the inferential level or at the evaluative level, right? Implied idea questions, meaning and context questions, right? Primary purpose, main idea, central theme questions, key arguments questions, logical development questions, application based questions, tone and attitude questions, style of the passage questions, likely profession of the author, likely source of the passage. All this is not given anywhere, it's not stated there. You have to evaluate inductive reasoning, right? So therefore, you whenever you do critical reasoning, you should say, हाँ, एक चीज मैं रिमाइंड कर दूं अपने आप को, आंसर पैसेज में डायरेक्टली नहीं दिया होगा, वो वाला होगा सही आंसर, जो डायरेक्टली दिया वो ट्रैप होगा. So that should be clear in your head when you do any critical reasoning question. So let us do examples which will further strengthen this concept. So let me read out, let's do it together. In film and videotape, it is possible to induce viewers to project their feelings onto characters on the screen. Okay, ये संभव है कि viewers को आप induce कर सको कि वो अपनी मन की भावना वो जो character screen पे दिख रहा है उसके ऊपर project कर सकें. In one study, so they carried out a study, and this first seems to be a conclusion from the study. So being able to, identify premise, conclusion, obviously a study होगा तभी आदमी conclusion पे पहुंचेगा. So study is being mentioned means top is a conclusion कि संभव है, ये हमने find किया है. कैसे find किया? So study. In one study, when a camera shot of a woman's face was preceded by a shot of a baby in a crib, the audience thought that the woman's face was registering happiness. So उन्होंने पहले ऑडियंस को एक बेबी दिखाया, उसके बाद इमीडिएटली बाद एक औरत की शक्ल दिखाई. ऑडियंस ने सोचा कि देख औरत कितनी खुश लग रही है. ठीक है. When the same shot of the woman's face was preceded by a shot of a lion running towards the camera, the audience thought the woman's face was registering fear. So फिर उन्होंने एक और पिक्चर दिखाई कि लायन उनकी तरफ भाग रहा है, तो ऑडियंस को डर महसूस हुआ. और फिर जब औरत का फेस आया तो उन्होंने अपनी फीलिंग ऑफ डर उस औरत के फेस पे प्रोजेक्ट किया और उनको लगा कि औरत भी फियरफुल है. फिर एट द एंड ही जस्ट मेक्स अ स्टेटमेंट, टेलीविजन न्यूज टीम्स मस्ट बी केयरफुल टू अवॉइड सच मैनिपुलेशन ऑफ द व्यूअर्स. सो इट्स लाइक दिस, पहले मैं टेररिस्ट का शक्ल दिखाऊं ये वो, उसके बाद मोदी की शक्ल इमीडिएटली दिखाऊं, सो पीपल विल बी टेरिफाइड ऑफ मोदी और थिंक ऑफ मोदी एज अ इनकारनेशन ऑफ टेररिज्म और समथिंग, राइट? सो कई बार गलती से भी just sequencing two let's say pictures in very short durations can result in wrong impression going. So which of the following can be inferred from the passage? The expression on the woman's face was in fact blank. अच्छा, तो औरत का फेस ब्लैंक था, इसलिए बेबी को देखा तो बाद में ऑडियंस को उसको लगा कि वो हैप्पी है, बट ब्लैंक फेस हैप्पी लगा. फिर ब्लैंक फेस फियरफुल लगा. ओके, पॉसिबल. लेट्स प्रोसीड फर्दर. A camera shot of a baby in a crib provoked feelings of happiness in the audience. Now this has not been explicitly stated. ये बात स्पष्ट रूप में नहीं कही गई. उन्होंने यही कहा है, when a woman's shot of a woman's face was preceded by a shot of a baby, the audience thought woman's face registered happiness. इतना का है. उन्होंने ये नहीं कहा कि बेबी को देख के ऑडियंस खुश हुआ. So that unsaid thing, what you can read in between the line is an inference. So now suppose I read it this way. In one study, when a camera shot of a woman's face was preceded by a shot of a baby in a crib, the audience thought the woman's face was registering happiness because seeing the baby, the audience felt happy, and therefore they projected their own happiness on that woman's face, and therefore they saw the woman as happy. So इस तरह कंप्लीट करूं by adding option 2 there, then वो बात पूरी बनती है. So this in a way is an inference which has been unstated in the passage. ये बात वहां कही नहीं गई, but can be directly inferred from, let's say, the second sentence and can be fitted in there. First, a shot of baby was shown. Audience, which provoked a feeling of happiness in the audience. Then a shot of a woman's face was shown, and the audience thought the woman's face was registering happiness. This is because the audience feeling of happiness on seeing the baby, now that same happiness they're projecting on the woman's face. So hence 2 is the answer. Let's look further. Audience should strive to be less gullible. Now gullible, what are they believing? They're not doing this consciously, you see. It is just happening unconsciously because of the short duration between one shot and another. So it is just a kind of a scientific thing that ऐसा करो तो संभव है. It is possible to induce viewers. So that is the conclusion. It is possible to view. Now to some extent, right? Okay. So from this it doesn't emerge. Even from, let's say, the last line. Television news teams must be careful to avoid such manipulation of the viewers. So now that this, actually that guy did it as a scientific exercise to find this out. Now he's worried that television news teams may misuse it. So he's just giving a cautionary thing to them that please, now that you know that it's possible to induce, don't bloody try to induce. It will be unethical. Okay, and similarly, this information is useful to the normal TV news viewer, that watch out, don't get influenced by such manipulation if anybody even tries it intentionally. So that is all unsaid, but the real part is it's possible to induce, and a study shows this. That is the heart of the argument. Premise is कि study ने ये दिखाया, conclusion is it's possible to induce. Right. Then fourth, the technique of manipulating audiences described. So it's not a method of manipulating. It's just that they're just doing experiments to check whether it's possible. This manipulating has a very negative tone to it. Okay. That it would work with film and videotape. That is given there, that is stated. In film and video it is possible. Right. So this technique should works with film and, so this is like stated. It's not an inference. It's not something other than what is already said in the passage. So inference has to be something what has not been said. So 2 is the one that has not been said. 1 also, blank. Now you never know, the woman may have a very angry face, and that angry face also audience finds it happy. At that angry face, the audience finds after the lion shot that is showing fear. So we don't know whether it was blank, angry, sad, right? If it is possible to project audience's feeling on whatever face is there, whether blank or whatever expression being shown, right? So that cannot be inferred. Let's say data inadequate to infer 1. So I hope you have understood what is inference. Let's see. So let's see a second example of inference. About 96% of Scandinavian moths have ears tuned to the ultrasonic pulses that bats, their predators, emit. So bats जो ये moths को खाते हैं, whenever they are approaching these moths, their ears are tuned to the sound, so they know a bat is coming. So then they can take evasive action or hide or whatever. But the remaining 4% do not have ears and are deaf. So one will at this point think, वो चार तो बेचारे मर गए. The others have a defensive mechanism, right? The ears are tuned. These 4 will be food for the bats, ready food. However, they means these remaining 4% have a larger wingspan than the hearing moths and also have higher wing loadings. The ratio between a wing's area and its weight, meaning higher maneuverability. Then all this lambi chodi baat is that it's more maneuverable. So God has or nature has given these deaf moths another way to defend themselves by giving them higher maneuverability. That means they can't hear the bat coming from a distance, but they have another defense mechanism. So, which of the following can be best inferred? A higher proportion of deaf moths than hearing moths fall prey to bats. Now, this I thought immediately after the second line, but when I found that nature has also given them a defense mechanism, a way to protect themselves, so now this doesn't seem all that inferable. Let's see the next. Deaf moths may try to avoid bats by frequent changes in their flight direction. Now, maneuverability changes in flight direction has a direct link. So, these deaf moths, when the bat comes close, then obviously their eyes can see if their ears cannot hear, right? At least their eyes can see, and by frequent then changes of flight direction, they can avoid the path of the bat or avoid the bat chasing them. Okay, because moth and bat size, there's such a big difference. So moth can easily escape the bat by changing flight directions. So this clearly is inferable from the word maneuverability. So 2 is my first choice. Let's proceed further. Deaf moths are faster than hearing moths and so are less prone to becoming a bat's dinner. Now faster and maneuverability. Faster is speed. That means bat is chasing a moth, and a moth is moving faster, and bat cannot catch up. Bat starts panting becomes breathless, and the moth gets away. It's like police, running after Milkha Singh, and they can't catch him because he's a very long distance runner, right? So the question is not of faster here. The question is of maneuverability. Bat is so big, moth is so small. Physically, it's just not possible for a moth to be faster, right? Even if it is, that is not what can be inferred from the passage. 4. The large wingspan enables deaf moths to better receive and sense the pulses. Now, nowhere is it stated or implied that the wingspan is helping. That means it has sound sensors fitted on it, like your ear has, that it can sense the pulses. That you're deaf, so nature has provided you ears on your wingspan. That makes no sense, and neither is it stated. The larger wingspan is only for high maneuverability. That is clearly stated in the passage. So you have to infer from what is stated, right? So therefore, question 2 is the answer. Okay, the second important question is identifying an assumption. So assumption, assuming things. So let's see the definition. An assumption is an unstated premise that the author assumes while making his argument without stating it explicitly. Now, why doesn't he state it explicitly? Because he assumes you know it. Why mention something? So let me give you a simple example. All native born Indians are citizens of India, therefore they are eligible to vote. Now, I did not say all citizens of India are eligible to vote. Therefore, all native born Indians are eligible to vote. Obviously, we're talking of above 18 years, right? So I skipped a premise, assuming कि अरे ये तो सबको पता है कि citizens वोट कर सकते हैं 18 साल के बाद, तो ये भी कोई बात जरूरत है. बट नेटिव बॉर्न वाली बात इंपॉर्टेंट है. ऑल नेटिव बॉर्न इंडियंस आर सिटीजंस ऑफ इंडिया, देयरफॉर दे आर एलिजिबल टू वोट, right? Not all these refugees from Bangladesh, etc., etc. So this is, we normally don't say certain things assuming them to be true, that people will understand them. So you are asked in this question, please, what has he left unstated? So just as inference was an unstated conclusion, assumption is an unstated premise. But that unstated premise, but which is necessary to connect the given premise to the given conclusion and thereby complete the argument. So to complete the argument that I just stated, you have to say all native born Indians are citizens of India. Assumption: all citizens of India above 18 years are eligible to vote. Therefore, all native born Indians above the age of 18 years are eligible to vote. This would be a complete argument, right? So, in questions related to assumption, the structure of the argument would look something like this. So, given premise will be given in the critical reasoning question. Given conclusion will be given in the passage. In the earlier case, we saw premise 1 and premise 2 given, no conclusion given. Here, they will state a premise and give you a conclusion. All native born Indians are citizens of India. Conclusion, therefore, they are eligible to vote. Assumption, all citizens of India are eligible to vote. So the unstated premise is that assumption, but it's necessary to link the given premise with the given conclusion. Again, don't say passage में कहाँ दिया है, right? Just as inference, don't say passage में कहाँ दिया है, मैं कैसे ये टिक कर दूं, मेरे तो हाथ कांप रहे हैं. अरे पैसेज में तो ही नहीं दिया, इसलिए तो तुम्हारे से पूछना जा रहा है. दे inferential level of meaning, ये बात तो समझो. You're not in school where all only literal level of meaning is tested. You're not in fifth standard like in my 9-year-old grandson's fifth standard books. When I do literature with him and comprehension with him, those questions just test you from what is given in the passage. You are far beyond that stage. Okay, so critical reasoning is nothing but RC. I don't know why, if you have been doing so much of RC, you shall say critical reasoning. I don't understand. कहाँ से करूँ मैं critical reasoning? अबे, you're already doing critical reasoning when you're doing RC. Every time you answer a inference question, you are doing critical reasoning. So let's see examples of assumption questions. Okay, so here is a critical reasoning question. 10% of all energy consumed in India is consumed by home appliances. Like what? Dishwasher, washing machine, AC, fridge, etc., etc. If appliances that are twice as energy efficient as other currently available are produced or manufactured, this figure will eventually be reduced to about 5%. From here, can you make what is the given premise? Given premise is one is information that home appliances consume 10% of total energy. Premise 2, if home appliances are made twice as energy efficient. Conclusion, then total energy consumed by home appliances will reduce to 5%, about half of 10%, because twice efficient ho gaya. So that is the argument is presenting. Now you are being asked which is the assumption. So let's look down. So given premise, I've left out the first one about 10% and all. Basic logic comes from the second premise. If home appliances are twice as energy efficient, energy consumed by home appliances in India will be halved. That's the essence, right? That's so obvious. and it's a complete argument. You'll say assumption ki zarurat hi kya hai? Why have an unstated assumption? Now the point is, let us see the options. Home appliances usage would not increase along with the energy efficiency of the appliance. Now you assume that my AC consumes half the power, right? Will I, if I'm using AC for 6 hours a day, will I only use it for 6 hours, or will I start now keeping it on constantly? Because now you suddenly find, अरे it's very efficient यार, ऑन रहने दो, बाहर जा रहे हैं ऑन रहने दो, आएंगे तो ठंडा ठंडा मिलेगा पूरा कमरा, right? So your consumption, it could affect your consumption pattern. So therefore, if home appliances are twice as energy efficient, consumption pattern remaining constant, that's then energy consumed would be halved. So consumption pattern remaining constant, like all Charles and Boyle's law and other things, this pressure and volume will, this thing, provided temperature remains constant, and so on and so forth, right? So because there are other factors that can influence this consumption of energy, so therefore home appliances would not, usage would not increase along with the energy efficiency of the appliance. So this, if you don't assume this, then your neat 10% to 5% or twice as efficient to half हो गया पहले से, that doesn't hold good. अगर यूसेज ही बढ़ गया तो फिर हाफ थोड़ी होगा, शायद ज्यादा हो जाए. So making it energy efficient may encourage people to use it bindas without worry. ठीक है, थोड़ा ज्यादा, so 10% से it could go up to 12-13% for all you know. Okay, so one therefore has to be assumed for this thing to hold good. Let's see others. Home appliance manufacturers now have experimental technology to produce more energy efficient. This, in a way, if, but he is talking of if. अगर हो, है या ना है, मारो गोली यार, उसका हमें क्या करना है. अगर हो तब ये होगा. तो तुम कह रहे हो हाँ है आजकल, होने वाला है very shortly. So that's not an assumption to his argument. That's only additional information for whatever it's worth. The cost of energy to the consumer would rise with increases in the energy efficiency. Why would that rise? Maybe the home appliances will, I don't know what he's trying to say. Will, let's say, the state electricity boards increase the price of electricity? I don't know what. So, anyway, that cannot be assumed. 4, the percent of energy consumed by home appliances will increase if existing appliances are not replaced by more efficient ones. So, that is true, because as home appliances get older, they may, start consuming a little more. So you must replace them with a more energy efficient one. But all this has nothing to do with the original argument. You'll say, sir, हाँ sir, but ये भी तो infer कर सकते हैं ना. अबे ये inference का question ही नहीं है, ये assumption का question है. So each question, switch your mind. There should be a plug. Straight away recognize, oh, assumption question. Assumption question means given premise क्या है, given conclusion क्या है, कौन सी चीज बीच में मुझे फिट करनी है जो इन दोनों को जोड़े. So that's why I've given you the structure below, right? So keep that structure in mind as you shift from one question to another. Okay, let's see another example. A committee that studies national television news broadcasts in the United States has recently released a report that compiles the number of hours that major network news programs devote to reporting disasters. Okay, so news channels spend, let's say, X amount of hours to reporting natural disasters. वहाँ flood हो गया, landslide हो गया, tsunami हो गया, forest fire हो गया, earthquake हो गया, whatever. So in 99, what did they find? That twice as much time was devoted to reporting natural disasters such as hurricanes, tornadoes, and floods as was devoted to travel related disasters such as airline and train crashes. Okay, so natural disasters ki reportage is twice in 99 in the US. Based on this report, one can conclude that more people die in natural disasters than in travel related diseases. ये dying पे सीधा कैसे पहुंच गया? चलो anyway, so given premise is that reporting of natural disasters is more than or twice in 99. So let's assume more, generally more than reporting on accidents of train or where large scale people die. ठीक है? Therefore, more people die in natural disasters than in accidents. So obviously there is something missing. He has not stated something, that unstated premise. Otherwise, this argument now seems a little empty. They say you need to fill in some assumption. So let us see. Twice as many people each year travel by air than by train. So how does that affect? So then, train air, the comparison isn't between air and train. Comparison is between natural disasters and accidents of aeroplanes and trains. Two, television news producers take their decisions about what disaster stories to cover based primarily on the number of human lives lost. Yes, so human lives do matter. So there's so many, if more people die, more relatives and families will be concerned. But death is such a sad event. So obviously, if in a landslide, tourists in Uttarakhand, a lot of them have died, a lot of coverage will be given there. So number of people dying seems to have a connection. So therefore, let us now put it in the form that we've been taught. So given premises, twice as much time devoted to reporting natural disasters as to travel related disasters. Assumption, uh, extent of reporting is directly proportional to number of people dying. This is what option 2 is saying, that they take their decisions about how much to report primarily because of number of deaths. So that means extent of reporting is directly proportional to number of people dying. So therefore, more people die, or twice as many people, or more people die in natural disasters than in travel related disasters. So 2 is what fills in that gap and makes the argument complete now. So this is the assumption. Now don't look for this in the passage. This is precisely what he has not said. He assumed you will understand because he's given a premise and then he's given a conclusion in the passage. He'll assume you understand here that reporting is based on number of people dying. And 2 says that. So what is the most obvious thing that fills in the gap? Now again, don't look for the most obvious thing that you can infer. Make this diagram, given premise, given conclusion. बीच में कौन सा चीज मिसिंग है? ठीक है? So 2 is the answer. Let's see further. Because of unusual weather patterns experienced during the world in 99, the United States suffered a much higher number of deaths due to natural disasters than ever before. So this is kind of giving a cause for that odd, special event of 99. But then that obviously, this has no sense because he's reaching a conclusion based on that data. The ratings for television news programs increase more significant during periods of natural disasters than during periods immediately following any. Why do they increase? What is the reason? नेचुरल डिजास्टर है तो रेटिंग बढ़ जाएगी. अरे क्योंकि रिपोर्टिंग ज्यादा हो रहा है. सो दिस प्रोबेबली इज एन इन्फ्रेंस कि रिपोर्टिंग ज्यादा हो रहा है तो रेटिंग बढ़ गई जी. बट ये वहां assumption की जगह फिट करो तो you don't reach the conclusion. It doesn't join the two together. So let's read Let's put 4 options in that gap. Twice as much devoted to reporting. So reporting natural disasters greater than reporting travel related disaster. Right? A rating of TV news increases with reporting natural disasters than reporting travel related disasters. Therefore, more people die in natural disasters than in travel. So this makes no sense. If you put 4 options in between, that makes no sense. But if you put 2 there, it makes sense. 4 can be an inference. So don't confuse an inference from an assumption. So I hope this assumption, which I find students generally find it difficult to understand, I hope this is clear. Okay, the third critical type of critical reasoning question is your ability to recognize factors that weaken or strengthen an argument. When weaken and strengthen come, you obviously know we are in the realm of inductive reasoning, right? So on some basis, you're reaching a conclusion. If you get additional information that could weaken your argument, weaken the conclusion, or strengthen the argument or conclusion, right? So these are cat favorites. These questions, and also these are easy to make in RC questions. So CAT 99 had weakening and strengthening questions. Similarly, ZAT RC also has such questions. So critical reasoning is an integral part of RC in ZAT in any case, and sometimes in CAT they also make it. There are many years when critical reasoning has kind of merged into RC as well. So these questions test you for your ability to recognize from the answer choices such additional premise, facts, information, evidence, which if true, please remember of the word if true, कि अगर ये बात सच है तो ये जो गिवन आर्गुमेंट है उसको मजबूत करेगी या कमजोर करेगी, एंड मोस्ट स्ट्रेंथन करेगी या मोस्ट वीकन करेगी, राइट? सो which if true most strongly weakens or strengthens the given conclusion or argument. So these are the kind of instructions given in GMAT exams. For some of these questions, all the answer choices may conceivably be answers to the question asked. So all of the options could weaken it, all of the options could strengthen it. Suppose there's a weakening question which most strongly weakens, and you say यार ये भी weak करता है, ये भी सारे तो weak करते हैं, all are weakening it, which do I choose? You have to choose most strongly weakens. Now you'll say, how do I know which is most strongly weakens? That is where your judgment comes in. But in questions, it's not so difficult to make that judgment. Let me assure you that. But the fact is, you are making a judgment. You should be aware of it. You're not doing it as a definite thing. You're doing it as a probable thing. You're in the realm of probabilistic situations. Understand that. If you don't understand that, then you are missing the whole point. So therefore, don't worry about other options. Just go for the most strongly weakens or strengthens. You are required to evaluate which answer choice strengthens or weakens more strongly. In these questions, the structure of the argument would look something like this. So there's a given premise and a given conclusion. From the choice, you have to look for that additional information, which, if true, will strengthen it or weaken it. Again, answer is not in the passage. All these additional things are additional to the passage. There are other informations which you didn't know, which, if true, how will it add? Now that if you know, suppose it's true, what will it do to the existing argument? Right? Passage में केवल given premise, given conclusion दिया है. Okay, here is, let's say, a first question of a strengthening question, strengthening an argument question. Women should not serve in the military in active duty combat roles because women cannot perform all the same physical tasks that men can. Because men are genetically larger and stronger, only men should be allowed to participate in active duty combat roles. So, obviously, there is an argument here. What is the premise? Let's see below. Given premises, women are physically weaker than men and cannot perform the physical tasks required in active military roles. Therefore, when it says only men should be allowed, means women should not be. So, women should not be allowed to participate in active duty combat roles. So, this is a simple argument. So, all the women may be upset by this argument and about being called physically weaker, etc. But again, most things in logic you have to say if true. If the given premise is true, the conclusion naturally follows. But now suppose this is an inductive argument, and suppose you get additional information, this could strengthen it or weaken it, or and so on and so forth. So let's see which of the following statements, if true, provides the most support for the above argument. So something further strengthening. So something further strengthening could be maybe some study has been done which shows women are by God physically weaker than men or something. I don't know. Right? So let's see the options. For the entire history of armed conflict in the world, only men have participated in active combat roles. So just because in history it has happened, so in future we should continue it to happen is hardly any logic. Give a specific reason why not women today. Times have changed. Entire history, we were always a patriarchal society. We brought up a woman just to stay at home. Man does the physically tough jobs of earning a livelihood by hunting and all that. I'm just saying, right? So don't talk of the past. Situation has changed. Today, how is this of any worth? So this does not support, even slightly maybe. You can say it mine slightly strengthens the above argument at best. Let's see further. Modern military conflict involves many more electronic computerized tools and weapons than ever before. So the coordination and skill are better indicators of an ability to succeed than sheer strength. So this clearly weakens. This says अरे physical strength भी पुराने जमाने की बात है. In old days when you had to carry such a heavy spear or a sword and all that kind of stuff, then physical strength was of great significance. But today you need more brains, more skill because of electronic computers, etc., etc., right? Which women could be equally good at or even better for all you know. So, to most weakens this argument or directly weakens this argument. But we are looking for the strengthening one. Had it been a weakening question, 2 would be the correct answer. 3. Cultural biases and traditions support the limitations on placing women in active combat roles because women are traditionally pictured as more nurturing and caring. So, does this strengthen? Do we have to follow biases? Biases itself has negative connotation. You're saying that we are biased against the women, right? And put her in a stereotypical role. So therefore, they're not fit for active combat roles. So this additional information, if I add in the argument, right, uh, it hardly supports because in today's world, uh, women are equal to men and for a long time. You see, it's not just that yesterday they became, equal to men. So, 3, I would not even say slightly strengthens. 4, advances in electronic technology have resulted in additional equipment that soldiers in combat positions are required to carry, increasing the size and weight of handheld weapons and backpacks. Now, this certainly shows that physically being tougher is required in modern warfare as well, right? Because of the size and weight of the weapons and the equipment you're carrying. So if women are physically weaker than men, and today's warfare requires to carry additional weight of weapons and electronic equipment, right? Then women should not be allowed to participate because this will further make their job tougher. Okay, so force strengthens the given argument. Thank you. Right, let's see another example. The excessive number of safety regulations that the government has placed on industry poses more serious hardships for big businesses than for small ones. So, safety regulations. So, probably there have been some accidents in factories, right? Maybe fires or burns or other things, right? Or people falling down or whatever. So, a lot of safety regulations government has come up with. It has placed on industry poses more serious hardships for big businesses than for small businesses. Okay, this is a conclusion. Why, on what basis are you saying this? So obviously this is a conclusion. To be able to recognize premise and conclusion is the first step. Since large companies do everything on a more large, massive scale, they must alter more complex operations and spend much more money to meet government requirements. So they'll face more hardships. So this is his argument. Let's put it down in the way we normally do. Let's put it at the end. Look at the bottom of the slide. So given premise, large companies, more massive scale, alteration of more complex operations than small ones. Hence, they will spend more money to meet safety requirements to do all this. Given conclusion, large companies will face more serious hardships than small companies. Okay, so this is your argument, right? That इतना ज़्यादा करना पड़ेगा तो लार्ज कंपनी को नेचुरली फिर ज़्यादा पैसा खर्चना पड़ेगा, spend much more money to meet government requirements. So ज़्यादा पैसा खर्चना पड़ेगा to meet these government rules. Okay, so they will therefore face more serious hardship than small businesses. So this is his argument. So which of the following, if true, would most weaken the argument above? So let's see the very first option. Small companies are less likely than large companies to have the capital reserves for improvement. That means small companies are less likely to have money in their balance sheet reserves, and large companies would have earned large profits over a longer time. In the balance sheet, they'll have a lot of money. Small companies will have less money. They may be living hand to mouth, that sell stuff, get the receivables, the money, and then buy raw material, again produce material, sell it, and keep waiting. So they may have a liquidity problem in being able to implement all these changes. So this is probably what he's saying. So will this weaken the above argument? So small companies agreed. So virtually one is saying agreed that small companies have to spend less. But even for spending less, they don't have any money. You see. While large companies, yes, they have to spend more money, but they have a lot of money. So therefore, money and hardship. So therefore, when you are a student of logic, you must see clearly the terms. More money does not necessarily mean more serious hardships. If I have no money, little money also spending is a big hardship. If another person has a lot of money and he has to spend a lot of money, then it's hardly a hardship. Like a poor widow gives, let's say, 100 rupees for charity. Now that's a big amount. She hardly earns anything. Out of that, she is saved and given 100 rupees. That's a big deal. Bill Gates gives, let's say, billions in charity. That's hardly anything for him. It's peanuts for him. So, more money does not mean more serious hardships. So, one actually weakens this. So one weakens the conclusion by saying that small companies will face more serious hardship, not large ones, because small companies don't have the money while large companies have the money. So having the money is another factor. So one most weakens the argument, or most means let's see aage. Let's see others only, then you can judge more. So in critical reasoning, you have to read all options, right? But I hope you have understood why one weakens it. Next, operations of small companies frequently rely on the same technology as the operation of large companies. So this is true. Let's say small companies are also doing TIG welding or something. Large companies are also doing TIG welding, but they are doing it on a larger scale and more complex operation. So therefore, they'll have to spend more money. So this, in a way, supports that part. Technology uh, is the same, but scale of larger companies is more. So therefore, they have to spend more money. So that supports that aspect. So this, in a way, strengthens the existing argument, right? Because technology being constant, scale varying, and large companies, large scale, therefore more money, therefore more hardship. Okay, so this saying technology remaining constant. Technology is the same, both places, large, small. Three, safety regulations are uniform, established without reference to size. So safety also remaining constant. The codes. So if you have 10 places, TIG welding is going on, so 10 times the expenditure. If you have one place, one time the expenditure. Because the codes are the same, they're uniform. You have to do that much for each place where that kind of building is happening to ensure safety. So this also strengthens technology same, security regulations code same. The only variable in large companies are that they have more scale and more complex, therefore more money and therefore more hardships. So his argument, only one is hitting at more money, more hardship. The link between more money, more hardships is what is option one hitting. That more money need not necessarily mean more hardships, while 2 and 3 are strengthening it. Large companies typically have more of their profit invested in other businesses than do small companies. So, if this is true, that means they don't have that money and they have to spend so much money. So, they will face hardships. Okay, so that strengthens it. That large companies' money is all invested. Agreed, they have more, they earn more, but they've already invested everywhere, so they actually have less money to spend, and they will have to spend more than a small company. So they will face more hardships. Yes, I agree with 4, but 4 will strengthen the argument. So 1 is the only one which is weakening it. So you must be able to see all options and say, okay, this strengthens, this weakens, this very slightly strengthens, this is irrelevant. Oh, this also weakens. Oh, but that most weakens. So let's go for that. So this is the kind of thinking you have to do, or the evaluation कि most है या थोड़ा weaken करता है, to some extent you can make those judgments. Right, the last kind of critical reasoning question that is most popular in CAT is logical completion. But then it has come, then came for a while, now it's not there. Critical reasoning doesn't come in CAT, but all this is important for RC. So therefore, it is important to understand critical reasoning for RC's sake. Remember that there's a great variety in the way a writer may end a paragraph. So it is a craft. A writer, there's a craft of writing. It's not that he follows rules, thumb rules. Then it's like then you can feed that to a software and say, please produce a short story about a boy who meets a girl and they're from a different religion and society opposes them. Okay, there's the theme, produce a story. Start with some starting sentence, end with some starting sentence based on the coding that I've done for you. Okay. It doesn't work that way. Writing is a craft, it's a skill. It varies from writer to writer. So, a writer may end the passage in different ways and different this thing. So let's just see now at a para level. So do not look for quick fix solutions. This is another big problem that tutorials, because they want to market and trap you into their, let's say fold, they try to say that yes, we'll give you the rule. Don't worry, yeah. You don't have to worry so much. After all, cat is not unfair. He's not going to ask you so difficult things that you can't handle without our help. Okay. So those who look for quick fix solutions, you will never reach anywhere in life. Understand, get into the mind of the writer, that what is he saying, how is his flow coming, how is he likely to end it. So it will vary from the same thing you do in parajumbles. Again, no formulas. So we'll see that in parajumble concepts, right, in the next video, which I'll be preparing shortly. Okay, so if a paragraph presents an argument, which is common in GMAT but rare in CAT and XAT. So in GMAT, you have logical completion paras and very tough ones, right? But they don't match with the CAT and XAT variety. You see, because here it's clearly GMAT critical reasoning is all about arguments, right? So in GMAT, it is easy. If the paragraph presents an argument, it is easy to recognize the last sentence, which logically concludes the arguments or resolves an apparent contradiction, and so on and so forth. So, critical reasoning of GMAT is easier to handle these kind of questions there. That's the point I'm making. And there you can probably follow a rule that, the last sentence, thus, hence, therefore, would naturally fit into the last sentence, right? But in CAT, GMAT, in CAT and XAT, it will not. So, second thing you must note, more often than not, the last sentence is closely linked to the penultimate sentence, the sentence coming before that. In such cases, grammar linking words and obviously the flow of thought help to establish the link. So, there's one aspect you have seen, that there can't be a sudden breakaway from the previous sentence. It has to flow also correctly. It can't be too abrupt, but sometimes it can be also, because he wants to show that I have made my thing. Now, this is the point I want you to note. On some occasions, the last sentence may simply summarize the preceding point in a succinct short sentence. So he may leave you with just one line. Listen, this is the main point I've made here for your benefit. Other times, the writer may have finished his point. So his penultimate sentence, he's completed his point, and at the end, he's just making a passing comment. So we'll see this through examples, right? Still other occasions, and you see, please note all this. This will also apply in parajumbles, because identifying the concluding or the last sentence there is again a crucial help in, and more so in theta question. You see, in multiple choice, to an extent, the options you can rule out, but in theta you have to be sure which is the starting, which is the concluding, how this pair must go together, therefore this is the final flow, etc. So sometimes it could be just a passing comment. On still other occasions, in the last sentence, the writer may repeat the main point by rephrasing it, which he had started off with in the opening sentence, to ensure the reader does not miss his main point. So, I've just tried to give you certain ways he could end, but suppose you are writing an essay on some issue, let's say the Naxalite problem in India. So how will you end it? You'll see how the flow goes, and it may have no link to your beginning sentence. So in a long paragraph, especially in a long passage, writer generally repeats what he has said in the beginning and the end, so that the thought is not lost. But in a small para, he doesn't. So there are therefore no rules. And sometimes these paras are taken from the middle of a long para or a passage. So you never know at what point he's ended it. Okay. So let's have a look. Here is a para completion example from a CAT exam. Most firms consider expert individuals to be too elitist, temperamental, egocentric, and difficult to work with. Force such people to collaborate on a high stakes project and they might come to fisticuffs. Okay, that makes sense. If they're elitist, temperamental, egocentric, difficult to work with, so they may start fighting with each other. Okay, high stakes project is a project where, let's say, Tata was trying to make a car within 1 lakh rupees. That could be a high stakes project. Now, an electrical car could be a high stakes project. I'm just giving you simple examples that you can relate to. Even the very notion of managing such a group seems unmanageable because the members are always fighting and physical. They're hitting each other, right? Pushing each other. So most organizations fall into default mode. What is the default mode? Setting up project teams of people who get along nicely. So they say, yeah, these experts are too elitist, temperamental, egocentric, and we put them together and they started fighting and nothing is progressing. So what's the use? How do we manage these guys? How do we get their expertise out? I want that metallurgist to say something on this. I want that uh, battery expert to say something on this, on that other materials, rare earths material guy to say something on that. So you want each expert guys to give those areas, specific areas of the expertise, the knowledge which only they have. That must come into the project. That's why you'll get this high stakes project going. But these guys are so egoistic. Their personal bloody egos are so big that to manage them is so difficult. So people said, "Chodo yaar. This guy may not be an expert, but theek hai, let's put them together." So they may get not such great experts, but guys who've been in the field a little bit, and but at least they are getting along nicely. Because otherwise, if they start fighting, then nothing happens. So let's at least get people who get along nicely. So this is what he has said. He is in a way concluded. So most organizations fall into default mode, setting up project teams of people who get along nicely. Now, the result, however, is disastrous. Why should the result be disastrous? They're not going to fight. The result could be useless because these guys are not experts. They've not been able to come up with the best electrical car possible with maximum battery life. Right? We are talking of a battery life of 1 million years of a car battery. This is the level at which technology has reached. So if you put not so expert guys, you will get that kind of result. But why disastrous? You'll get a project report from where you can make a car, but that car may not be the best. Disastrous would be if you continue with the expert individuals and they fight and they become enemies forever and your project whole goes for zero, then yes, then it could be disastrous. But he's saying most organizations fall into default mode and they set up teams which of people who get along nicely. Now, immediately after you are saying result would be disastrous. अबे वो लोग they are cooperating with each other. They are trying their best to make the best electrical car they can come up with. So one is out. The result is mediocrity. Okay, let's proceed further. The result is creation of experts who then become elitist. So you put people who get along nicely, who are not experts, and in the process of their working together, they become experts. Abhi, how will they become experts? Just by working on one project. How will he become you know, will he to start doing research after he has joined the project team? Then we can wait for each to do his own research for ages. So this is nonsense. Who then become elitists? So that you get them who work nicely, then they become experts by doing their independent research, and then they again develop big egos. and they start fighting, again the project becomes zero. Is this what is going to be the result? Naturally, they drive innovation. How will they drive innovation when it's a default mode? Default mode is, you know, by itself a negative connotation. So you can see that the too much of positive, they drive innovation doesn't fit in. The end has to be not so good. Why did you think of experts earlier in any case? Only so that you could have good result, expert result. So opposite of expert is mediocrity. So answer is the result is mediocrity. So finally you have to fit into the situation, and then so here probably so sometimes a succinct sentence can say, so what is he saying totally? Experts are this. Therefore, if you force them to on a high stakes project, they will get into fighting, and managing such a group will be so almost impossible. So organizations generally then fall into default mode and make people who get along nicely. And what do we get? Mediocrity at the end. So it's a lose-lose situation kind of a thing. Okay. So this is the negative kind of thing that's coming out. But what can you infer from here? Inference is that he is trying to convey, therefore, learn to handle those experts. Right? If you want to get expert knowledge of experts, appoint such a team leader who is expert in a multidisciplinary manner, who can handle that battery expert, that metallurgical expert, right? To show कि listen यार तेरी knowledge पुरानी है, मुझे latest पता है. So he will command the respect. Then there won't be fights. Then there won't be fights. I know more than you. That kind of thing. So the answer is learn to manage experts if you want to get the best from experts. Otherwise, you'll fall into default mode and you'll get mediocre. So this kind of understanding. So finally, what is it? It's RC here. Okay, let's see another. Right. So we start with a thus. Thus, the end of knowledge and the closing of the frontier that it symbolizes is not a looming crisis at all, but merely one of the many embarrassing fits of hubris in civilization's long industry. Industry means long effort and hard work. This industry doesn't mean like industry as you know it. Okay. So, as a civilization, we have worked very hard. Then we discovered the atom and found, oh, we have reached the most indivisible part of matter, right? So, atom is the smallest indivisible part of matter, right? So, we thought we had come to the end of knowledge. Then we realized later that that atom has so much other things in it, right? So we at that time thought knowledge has ended, science frontier is closed. And anyway, why if knowledge ends and frontier closes, why should it be a looming crisis? Because scientists say, oh, we know everything, now we don't need to know anything, so we are jobless now. So so that's a crisis if you don't know what next to do because you've already reached the end of knowledge. You can't know beyond that, that's a crisis. So he's saying that's the end of knowledge, and uh, the closing of the frontier that it symbolizes is not a looming crisis at all, but it's just one of those fits of hubris where we think, yes, arrogance, oh yes, we have reached the end. We have discovered the smallest indivisible part of matter, atom. And then we made a DNA. We synthesized DNA in the lab. And oh, now we can create life. So it's the end of knowledge. So these are and then why are these fits of hubris embarrassing? Because then we realize, oh shit, there's more coming. There's no end to knowledge. There's no closing of frontier. It keeps going on. Right? So it's embarrassing that we think in our arrogance that we have solved the mysteries of nature, but which then prove that that was short-lived arrogance, and we feel embarrassed that oh, we should have thought that we have to yet to make a cell in a lab. Cell is where full metabolism takes place. DNA is not enough. Okay, so in the end, it will pass away and be forgotten. That means you've got this end of knowledge, you reach the frontier, so then you'll forget about it, right? Ours is not the first generation to struggle to understand the organizational laws of the frontier, deceive itself that it has succeeded, and go to its grave having failed. So now the point is clear. Earlier also, in the long march of civilization's long hard work, many such end of knowledge and closing of frontier situations came, but we thought we had succeeded, we deceived we had succeeded, but actually we went to our graves having failed because later it was discovered that this is much more to be known. Now, how should you end it? One would be wise to be humble. So when I looked at this the first time, I thought this is too abrupt. And suddenly one would be wise to be humble after so much of high intellectual stuff, one simple statement like this. So I left out one. But we might be the first generation to actually reach the frontier. But he's saying ours is not the first generation. That means we have already struggled to understand, we have fooled ourselves that we have succeeded, and we will go to our grave having failed. He's already said ours is not the first. That means we have also done it. So you can infer that if ours is not the first generation to do all this, that means we have already failed. So how can you say to reach the frontier, we might be the first generation to deal with the crisis? Crisis is obviously that it's not a looming crisis, this end of knowledge thing. So, however, this time the success is not illusory. So we have actually failed. Ours is not the first, means we have also failed. So by elimination, 2, 3, 4 go and one is left. So I'm just saying it is all RC. Now here, what formula would work? Can I say last sentence is always a small sentence? Or last sentence is always some vague sentence? What should I tell you? What formulas can I give you? Please tell me.